Before Dune Prophecy started to air, we'd been wondering what the main theme and the end goal of the series would be. Sure, the word prophecy tipped us off to the idea that there was going to be a certain degree of oracular business going on, but then the first episode dropped, and we realized that the Sisterhood was still viewing prescience as a sequence of nightmares. It was only when we saw the main enigma of the series that we understood its real purpose, as oxymoronic as it sounds. Desmond Hart was shrouded in mystery when he first showed up in episode 1, likely because there's no character by that name in the Dune-iverse as it exists. But over the course of 5 episodes, we've come to learn that he's nothing more than a blueprint for the future of the franchise. The prophecy that Max's Dune series focuses on is none other than the one relating to the Kwisatz Haderach, and in this video, we'll explain how it was created off the back of Desmond's powers, according to the show's timelines. Before we get into this explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
You are so special.
What is the Kwisatz Haderach prophecy? What are its major signs? So, to start things off, let's clear up a misconception that many people have with regards to the Kwisatz Haderach, chiefly that he is the prophesied savior of the Galactic Empire, or even the Fremen. This isn't true. The Kwisatz Haderach is the name given to the hypothetical superbeing that the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood wanted to create through their genetic breeding program. The reason this misconception arises has a lot to do with the fact that the term Kwisatz Haderach comes from the Shakobsa language, which is the chief tongue of the Fremen as well. The assumption is, since the sisters are using Fremen language, this must surely be a prophecy related to them, but that's incorrect. 2 entirely separate groups of people can speak languages that sound and read rather similar, and the Bene Gesserit philosophy prioritized using language as a weapon. The sisters believed that language shaped thought, so they mastered most known languages of the Imperium in order to better prepare themselves for communication with every feasible society. The fact that they used it to describe their superbeing has more to do with what it represents, which is the literal translation of Kwisatz Haderach, the shortening of the way. It's adopted from a term that pops up in the Talmud and relates to the miracle of teleportation. In Sanhedrin 95a3, astrologers tell Sennacherib if he conquers the Jewish kingdoms immediately, he would be successful. If he doesn't, he would never be able to do so, and then the Gemara relates that he covered in a day a distance that would have taken 10 days to walk. In the Jerusalem Talmud, there's a tale of a farmer who inexplicably reaches Babylonia from Israel in a single day while chasing an escaped bull, utilizing the mysterious power of the shortening of the way. In these Talmud sources, the Kwisatz Haderach is akin to a divine miracle, a literal shortening of physical distance achieved by compressing the path itself. But in the Dune-iverse, this path is more abstract, more along the lines of human evolution and destiny. Centuries before the Spacing Guild was established, the ancient sorceresses of Rossack discovered a unique property of the human gene, which could only be unlocked with a specific kind of drug. When this drug was taken, a sorceress would awaken the genetic memories of her ancestors, leading all the way back to her first ancestor, provided she could neutralize the lethal effects, of course. This process led to the discovery of prescience, and through prescience, the Sisterhood realized a way forward for the entire universe. The sorceresses of Rossack were extremely powerful in their own right, capable of accurately controlling their biochemistry down to the last cell and using psychic abilities that would render anything in its blast radius brain dead. But even after expanding their minds, they could only access 1/2 of the genetic data available to mankind. This probably had something to do with the chromosomal structure of the female sex's DNA, which lacks the Y gene that diversifies them into males. Because of this incomplete knowledge, the sisters desired access to the entire genetic map of their other memory, which they believed would give them the power to guide the Imperium to even greater heights. The sorceresses of Rossack originally established their breeding program as a way to produce ideal specimens of their species, which was difficult to accomplish because of their planet's environment. Over time, this goal changed into producing capable leaders for the Imperium, which the Sisterhood could control, which is acknowledged in Dune Prophecy, and eventually, the creation of the Kwisatz Haderach. In the millennia that followed, the Sisterhood experimented with several male prospects, but none of them survived the ultimate test, the Spice Agony. The Kwisatz Haderach was supposed to be a Reverend Mother, a Mentat, and a Guild Navigator all in one. His eyes would see where the sisters couldn't, into the male genetic history that was represented in their minds as a place of terrible darkness. His prescience wouldn't be as schismatic as the Sisterhood's was, and through his command of the space-time continuum, he would shorten humanity's path to evolution. Being able to peer into the veil wheel of time and predict future events through infinite possibilities would put the Kwisatz in the prime position to guide humanity away from extinction and onto a path that led to true salvation. Through centuries of inbreeding, the sisters not only hoped to foster the best possible collection of genes, but also loyalty to their cause. The Bene Gesserit were all about control through the illusion of choice. They never involved themselves directly in any decision-making process, choosing instead to manipulate events from the shadows. The opening shot of Dune Prophecy tells us that victory is celebrated in the light, but it is won in the darkness, and this is a core ideology of the Sisterhood. Through their positions as truthsayers, wives, and concubines to the most powerful members of the Imperium, they incubated specific bloodlines which their calculations judged would lead to the birth of the Kwisatz, and the entire process was set to culminate in unification of all aspects of the Imperium. In the Sisterhood's original plans, the Kwisatz was going to be born to an Atreides female and a Harkonnen male. Through him, they planned to seize the Golden Lion throne and become the ultimate force in the known universe. They were confident that their prospect would be able to unite House Atreides and House Harkonnen, as well as the Imperium at large, mostly because they knew that his lineage would make him a legitimate candidate for the throne. Thousands of years ago, when Fakan Butler led humanity to the ultimate victory against the thinking machines, he took the name Corrino as his imperial title. But Fakan had two brothers as well, and one of them was Abu Lurd Harkonnen, the man history remembers as the reason behind the Atreides-Harkonnen feud. Fakan himself was technically a Harkonnen because he was descended from the legendary Xavier Harkonnen, but his family changed its surname to his wife's family title when Xavier II was disgraced by the Atreides. We'll get into all this in our video detailing the hidden history of House Harkonnen, but the reason we bring all this up is to say that should the Corrino line ever go extinct, then the family that stands to inherit the throne after them would be the Harkonnens, and a male heir would ensure that happened. The Bene Gesserit had controlled Shaddam's inheritance for decades. By marrying him to one of their own, they made certain that he only produced daughters, and though his designated heir, Irulan, was set to inherit the throne after him, should she marry a suitable groom, control of the Imperium would roll over to him. Even on the Atreides side, the blood relations between them and House Corrino were strong enough to merit inheritance. Duke Leto Atreides was a cousin of Emperor Shaddam's, and if the Harkonnen blood of the prospective Kwisatz didn't put him on the throne, then his Atreides blood would. The Sisterhood was banking on complete obedience from its members and the super being they would eventually produce to pull off their plans for universal domination, but they should have known that controlling such a power would be out of the question once it realized its own potential and their manipulation. The Bene Gesserit figured that since they were the ones holding the reins, that the prize horse wouldn't knock them out of the saddle, but Paul did that as soon as he was tested with the Gom Jabbar. Speaking of the Gom Jabbar, surviving it was one of the signs that a male prospect could become the Kwisatz Haderach. The test was designed to gauge the human awareness of the person it tested. An animal, when subjected to great pain, would gnaw its hurting limb off rather than endure, but a human would play dead so it could kill its tormentor instead of escape it. The Bene Gesserit used this philosophy to understand which of its sisters possessed the potential to become Reverend Mothers, and since the Kwisatz was supposed to be a male Reverend Mother, Kwisatz prospects were given the test as well. Another sign of the super being emerging would be the presence of prescience in a male Bene Gesserit child. Paul had visions and dreams of Arrakis long before he moved there, and in those dreams, he saw the Fremen, a culture he'd never laid eyes upon. In the first Dune film, Paul's prescience is semi-linked to his pain because during his Gom Jabbar test, he starts getting flashes of his destiny as the Kwisatz Haderach. If a male showed signs of prescience and survived the Gom Jabbar, they would then be allowed to take the Water of Life, which was akin to a death sentence for the uninitiated. The Water of Life and most other awareness spectrum narcotics are poisonous in the Dune-iverse. In order to access their power, the person ingesting them must neutralize their effects using heightened prana bindu body manipulation, and only when that happened would their prescient eye reveal itself. Every male who attempted this stage of the Kwisatz Haderach program died, with the exception of Paul, who ended up fulfilling its ultimate goal. The program was a success in that it managed to produce the super being the Sisterhood was looking to create, but it was an utter disaster in that they lost control over their creation, which led to them being marginalized and detached from Imperial developments. Keeping all this in mind, let's now take a look at how Dune Prophecy uses each of these aspects to show us that Desmond was the first Kwisatz candidate. Every sign that makes Desmond the first Kwisatz candidate in Sisterhood history. Everything we mention in this section is non-canon, in that it doesn't come from the Frank Herbert novels, not even the Dune Encyclopedia or the extended Dune-iverse. Desmond Hart is an entirely new creation for Dune Prophecy, but he is an extension of something that was set up in the Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson books. Episode 5 of Prophecy revealed that Desmond Hart is the long-lost son of Tula Harkonnen and Ori Atreides. In the novels, Tula was pregnant with Ori's child, but she never gave birth to it, and she hid all knowledge of it from her sister Valia. It was only when the duo confronted the last living members of House Atreides, Vorian and Willem, that this fact was revealed, and even then, it was used by the Harkonnens to their advantage. The timeline of Prophecy is well past that point in the novels, so it makes sense that Desmond is all grown up now, but we'll address more of this in another video. The thing that makes him the first Kwisatz candidate is the way in which he describes his experience on Arrakis. In Episode 1, we're told that Desmond survived 12 tours of Arrakis as an Imperial soldier, but on his 13th tour, something unexpected happened. Desmond and his crew were stranded in the desert and faced by a fast-approaching sandworm from which there was no escape. Desmond knelt in the sands of Arrakis and faced his impending doom head-on, but where he should have died, he emerged reborn with a consciousness that could now pick up the words of nameless gods. He returned to Seleucia Secundus and made himself indispensable to the Emperor by killing his political rivals and ingratiating himself with the Empress. Desmond was imprisoned for the former of those acts by Javico in Episode 2, but that's where we get even more evidence of his prescient powers. Valia Harkonnen interrogates Desmond with the Emperor and Empress as witnesses. She arrived on Seleucia Secundus to determine just how this man managed to kill a Reverend Mother half a galaxy away, but in doing so she weakened her own position. Her questions started off well enough, but it was when Kasha was brought up that things became real interesting. Desmond claimed that he killed Kasha because he saw the corruption in her heart, just like he sees the blood trailing Valia's footsteps. When she picks up on his use of the word see, she activates her truth sense to gauge whether he meant prescience. Desmond told her that Shai-Hulud took his eye and gave him the power to look where even she cannot, and the interrogation pretty much ended there. The Emperor and Empress had no idea what any of that meant, but they could tell that the sisters were playing them based on Desmond's answers, so they banished him from the court. The Empress personally sees to Desmond's release when she visits him later in the episode, and during their conversation, Desmond drops even more hints at his supposed nature. Natalia asks him if he's a prophet, and he says that he would have laughed at that question a while ago, but now he's not so sure. All he knew is that when Shai-Hulud swallowed him up and spit him out, it gave him the power to do beautiful and terrible things. This is almost identical to the wording of the promise Jessica made to Paul in Dune Part 2, where she tried convincing him to take the water of light. She told him that if he took it, he would see it all, the beauty and the horror, as the Kwisatz Haderach. In Episode 4, when he's giving his hardline speech to the council, he says that all the critters and creatures of Arrakis that can kill a man run away and cower in fear when the Leviathan rises from the sands. He also calls this Leviathan the Devil, and in the Dune novels, Shai-Hulud is seen both as a manifestation of God as well as Shaitan, aka the Devil. When Desmond uses his mysterious power on those present within the council chamber that conspired against the Emperor, he has a vision of the sandworm swallowing him, and then two blue eyes stare back at him through a cloud-like void. This is the exact same vision that every novice of the Sisterhood has in Episode 5. In Episode 2, he told everyone that he was born on the planet Balat, but by the end of the 5th, he admitted that he had been sent there to live amongst the scavengers by his mother, who was also a Bene Gesserit's sister. All these pieces of information and the things that he can do with his body and mind point to only one possibility, that Desmond Hart is the proto-Kwisatz Haderach. Now, we know that he's lacking the main feature by which we can understand his emergence, those being the eyes of a bod, but using contact lenses to cover up one's true eye color isn't a new concept to the Dune-iverse. And Desmond is most certainly making use of technology that he himself wants to ban. We saw him hand Harrow Harkonnen what looked like a gel sphere in order to record evidence of his aunt's treachery, and gel spheres were an integral part of the thinking machine empire. If he's using tech like that, then having access to contact lenses that hide the eyes of a bod isn't going to be a major revelation. But to convince you guys of our theory, let us contextualize all of what we've said in this section in regards to the Kwisatz Haderach program. The Bene Gesserit believe that the Kwisatz will be a male Reverend Mother who will unlock both female and male genetic memory. Desmond Hart's claims that he can see where Valia can't see certainly implies that he has access to both sides of his other memory, and this implication is further strengthened by the claim that he can hear the will of the gods. Because Desmond has no idea what's actually happening to him, he could just be interpreting interpreting the whisperings of his ancestors' ego memories as the word of God. He can also resist the power of the voice, which only highly trained Bene Gesserit can do, so there's that as well. We believe him when he says that he can see the trail of blood following Valia's footsteps, because as a prospective Kwisatz, that would be well within the range of his power. Moreover, the fact that his mother was a sister who abandoned him could have reached him through simple word of mouth, or he could have seen it in his other memory, seeing as Tula is a reverend mother and her consciousness should be present within his genes. If that is how he knows, all the more reason to think he's the Kwisatz, and then there's his combined Gom Jabara/Water of Life serum. In episode 5, we see Tula training the novices in Prana Bindu techniques by having them neutralize the pain from a burner scorching their palms. It's possible that the poison needle method of the Gom Jabbar hasn't been invented yet, considering the fact that they still rely on the Rawsak drug's agony as opposed to the spice agony. But when you consider Desmond's story about getting swallowed by a sandworm and then coming out of its maw with prescient powers, it kinda sounds like he went through these final two tests at the same time. Shai Hulud's teeth are pointed and extremely sharp, so sharp that the Fremen make battle knives out of it. These needles would have ripped into Desmond's flesh as he descended the worm's intestinal tract. However, before he was digested, he came into contact with the water of life, which is nothing more than the internal bodily fluids of the great sandworm. When that happened, his entire existence was flipped on its head, so he emerged from the sands reborn as a prophet-like figure. The last couple of minutes or so are pure speculation on our part, seeing as we're trying to piece together a story from the vaguest of clues, but if we're right about it, then there should be no doubt about why this video is titled what it is. Based on these events, Desmond Hart's lifetime will end up being reverse-engineered and assimilated into the Sisterhood's breeding program, which will shift its focus from producing controllable leaders to producing the ultimate. Valia's concern over his inexplicable power is valid, because once she understands it, she'll want to control it. The reason we say Dune Prophecy will reverse-engineer the Kwisatz Haderach program is that they have this super being before they have his prophecy. Usually it's the other way around, and it's here that one of the biggest flaws of the recent Dune adaptations comes to light, at least according to us. How Dune Prophecy homogenizes the Kwisatz Haderach program. One of the reasons it took such a long time for a vibe-faithful Dune adaptation to surface is the way the original story is structured. Frank Herbert wrote the Dune novels to be highly introspective in nature, which meant that a lot of its dialogue was internal. Because of this, Dune was believed to be impossible to film for the longest time, and when cult director Alejandro Jodorowsky wanted to adapt it in the 70s, he insisted that the runtime be anywhere between 10 to 14 hours. Denis Villeneuve spread the first Dune novel across 2 films with 5 hours of content, and even then, Dune Part 2 felt slightly rushed, so perhaps Jodorowsky was right. But the reason we bring this up is to tell you guys that when a piece of literature as detailed and abstract as Dune is translated for screen, certain elements of the original story are bound to be simplified. And that's what happens with the Kwisatz Haderach program. In the novels, the Kwisatz Haderach was not going to be the savior of the Fremen. He was going to be the savior of the known universe thanks to his prescient powers, and perhaps because of that, the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood planted myths about messiahs on many of the Imperium's fringe worlds. The Missionaria Protectiva was conceived as a protective measure for Bene Gesserit sisters that found themselves stranded on these planets and needed to access key resources for their survival. On Arrakis, they seeded the myth of the Mahdi, the messiah that would deliver them from persecution and lead them as their king before the end times arrived, and this was recognized by Jessica as a particularly troubling sign. The Mahdi myth was reserved by the Sisterhood for planets with exceptionally harsh conditions, and the fact that it was present on Arrakis meant that Jessica needed to lean into it to survive the Fremen. The Mahdi myth is separate from the Lisan al-Gaib, but over the millennia, the two came to be conflated with one another until they were basically one and the same. By the time Paul arrives on Arrakis, the Fremen came to believe that the Lisan al-Gaib, aka the voice of the outer world, would become their Mahdi. The Lisan al-Gaib would be the son of a Bene Gesserit, he would know the ways of the desert as if he was born in it, and once he took his place among the Fremen, he would lead them to a green paradise. Paul takes the name Muad'Dib as his Fedaykin call sign because he's inspired by the kangaroo mouse of Arrakis. But it turns out that Muad'Dib is a powerful name in Fremen culture because they believe the kangaroo mouse to be wise in the ways of the desert, as it made its own water. Muad'Dib was also the name of the constellation that points north, so it roughly translates to the one who points the way in Fremen culture. In the novel and the movie, Paul's decision to take the name was based on a whim, but the latter turns it into one of his many titles which are related to the Missionaria Protectiva. In Dune Part 2, Princess Irulan realizes what's happening on Arrakis is the Sisterhood's fault, because the names that she was hearing lined up with their religious engineering. She specifically brought up Muad'Dib as the Fremen prophet, but the fact of the matter is, this is an oversimplification. The Bene Gesserit myth was about the Mahdi, not Muad'Dib, and neither title begins with the letter L. Even when it comes to Paul, the movie makes a change that turns his terrible purpose into a tragic necessity. Because showing his internal dialogue would be impossible without boring the audience, Villeneuve chose to have the voices of Paul's other memory play that role. But in doing that, he made Paul's prescience a power to grab more than a curse to resist. Every time he has a major encounter with Spice, he hears the voices call him Kwisatz Haderach and urge him to rise up. But the thing is, this is a movie-exclusive decision. In the novel, Paul is terrified of his future because he knows what it'll bring. Yet, his decision to lean into the Mahdi role is a conscious one, not motivated by the revelation that he was a Harkonnen. He does Mahdi things long before he makes that speech from the third act of Dune Part 2, where in the end, Lisan al-Gaib, Mahdi, and Muad'Dib become practically interchangeable with the term Kwisatz Haderach. This kind of oversimplification takes away from the layered nature of Bene Gesserit plans from the Frank Herbert novels, because it essentially gives different names for the same thing. In the novels, all those terms have different meanings and origins, and they don't come together in a synergistic display. The oversimplification has also been carried over into Dune Prophecy, because Episode 5 basically made the mingling of Atreides and Harkonnen blood a necessity for the Kwisatz. Prophecy heavily implies that one of the main reasons that Desmond Hart has the powers that he does is because of his bloodline. In Episode 4, we're told that the key to the reckoning will be a person born twice, once in blood and once in spice. This revenant full of scars would be a weapon born of war on a path far too short. So far, it fits Desmond's life to a T, because he was born twice. His first birth occurred shortly after the bloodbath that was Tula's Atreides massacre, and his second birth came when he survived the Shai Hulud's gaping maw. He has scars all over his body, and they open up when he uses his mysterious power to change his target's internal biochemistry. This ability has effects similar to the Omnius Plague, but its application process is near identical to the way the sorceresses of Rossack use their psychic abilities to kill their enemies. When Lila survives Spice Revival and wakes up the consciousness of Mother Rakella in Episode 5, she tells us that the two blue eyes staring back from the darkness belong to the Reckoning's key, and that if he succeeded, the Imperium would fall to tyranny and humanity would backslide into self-destruction. Desmond saw these same eyes when he was attacking the insurgents, and he does seem to have set House Corrino on the path to tyranny. His extreme measures when dealing with the insurgents and House Rachis have earned Javico the fear of his subjects, and if the Landsraad grows too weary of the Emperor, it could engage in a civil war to get rid of them. All these signs point towards Desmond Hart being the key, and his actions certainly back this up. But the true message of Rakella's death vision lies in the phrase, "on a path too short." This is the first chronological mention of the Kwisatz Haderach in the new Dune franchise, and we think this is how Desmond ends up becoming the template for Paul down the line. The Reckoning specifically refers to the destruction of the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood thanks to that blue-eyed entity, and if we're correct about this, that thing can only be the God Emperor Leto II. In the novels, Leto's Spice rebirth is a true rebirth, because he ends up transforming into a human sandworm hybrid. He becomes a revenant of scars when sand trout cilia penetrate his flesh and bones and begin his metamorphosis. During his 35 centuries, he marginalizes the Sisterhood and oppresses humanity on a scale so unfathomable that he's forever remembered as the Tyrant, which could be why his reign is referred to in the show as Tiran Arafel, or the Tyrant's Judgment. What we think is going to happen is that at the end of Prophecy, Valia and Tula will come to realize that they've been looking at this the wrong way. Instead of killing the Kwisatz Haderach, they were supposed to create him so they could control their own reckoning. Desmond's Atreides and Harkonnen lineage will give them the idea to squash the beef on their own terms millennia down the line, because in the original Bene Gesserit Kwisatz program, the super being was supposed to be a Harkonnen male. By becoming Emperor, he would have fulfilled Valia's desire to put his sister on the throne and put the Harkonnens above the Atreides on the pecking order permanent. But making the Atreides and Harkonnen gene pool such an integral part of the super being's genetic makeup, it turns the Atreides-Harkonnen feud into the beating heart of the franchise. Dune is way more than a petty squabble between two great houses. The Kwisatz Haderach is certainly meant to be above such things. things. In the novels, Count Hasimir Fenring was a failed Kwisatz candidate, and he certainly wasn't an Atreides or a Harkonnen. By making this family feud the central conflict of the Dune-iverse, the creators of the cinematic franchise have made it easier to understand the narrative, but they've also risked alienating hardcore Dune fans because they know Dune isn't about such things. It's a commentary on abstract ideologies, on the fact that humans will follow charismatic leaders off a hill if they're captivating enough, and on the idea that superpowers were going to guide humanity to salvation instead of the human spirit to endure and keep moving forward. We hope the cinematic Dune universe finds a way to introduce these things to their narrative soon enough, because otherwise, the allegations about them turning Paul's story into one of a tortured messiah would end up coming true. Marvelous verdict! But as for this video, we hope you guys understand when we say this is all we got for you on the Kwisatz Haderach front. We think it's pretty impressive how Dune Prophecy has managed to fit in callbacks to the Villeneuve movies that make sense and feel consistent. Desmond Hart being the source of Paul Atreides' eventual rise will feel all but natural by the time the finale is done, and if we're lucky, we'll even get another season of the show to fully dive into the nature of this super being program. But until then, this is what we've got for you guys, and we hope it sparked enough thoughts in your brains for you to leave us a comment. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Dune content, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Till then, stay safe and don't go around licking powders that smell like cinnamon but aren't cinnamon, because trust us, you aren't ready for that trip just yet.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe out there, and thanks for watching.